The G20 Summit, which brought leaders of the world's biggest economies together in Rio de Janeiro, produced a final declaration on Monday evening on the eve of its last session. And on Tuesday, Brazil's president, Luiz Inácio da Silva, handed over leadership of the G20 to Cyril Ramaphosa, president of South Africa, and set off for the federal capital, Brasília, where he will meet Chinese leader Xi Jinping, who's in Brazil for a state visit. And this week, we're going to discuss the results of Brazil's G20 presidency and cast a glance towards that encounter between Lula and Xi. My name's Ewan Marshall, Deputy Editor of the Brazilian Report, and this is Explaining Brazil. If you like Explaining Brazil, you should subscribe to our website, The Brazilian Report, which is the journalistic engine behind this podcast. Or you can go the extra mile and make a donation to our newsroom, tipping our journalists via our Buy Me a Coffee page. And you can also subscribe to our Buy Me a Coffee fan page, pledging a monthly contribution to our newsroom in exchange for exclusive content that you won't find anywhere else. Our Buy Me a Coffee subscribers are Cristina Viu, Andrei Novoseltsev, Wild Rice, Jaciara de Oliveira, Carson Allen, Gabriel Luca, Pan Ludwig, Leslie Seal, Mark Hillary, Louise Renz, Erwan Menais, Aaron Berger, Kars Vrieswick, Alistair Townsend, Miller Renarcido, Peter Abramson, David Dixon, Jose Ozzy Stankovic, Emerging Market Muser, Anna Lund, Peter Suffren, Anderson da Silva, and someone who chose to remain anonymous. And our Buy Me a Coffee members come from all over the world, so please, if we're butchering the pronunciation of your name, please send us an email. If you too believe in the importance of independent journalism, and if you want to hear your name on our podcast, go to buymeacoffee.com/Brazilian Report and subscribe to one of our membership levels. Click on buymeacoffee.com/Brazilian Report to find out more. And to discuss all things G20 and China, I'm delighted to be speaking to our reporter Isabela Cruz, who's covering the G20 from the summit's International Media Center in Rio de Janeiro. Isabela, thanks so much for being with us.
My pleasure, Ewan. Thank you.
And so just to kick off the conversation, tell us a little bit about the G20's final declaration. What's in it? What's the outcome for Brazil? And was there any risk of maybe not getting that declaration over the line?
Well, the final declaration covered the issues Brazil prioritized during its presidency of the G20, which are the fight against hunger and poverty, climate action, and the need for reforming multilateral institutions. The mentions of the wars in Ukraine and the Middle East were also very much in line with the Brazilian government's stance on these conflicts. It's important to note that the word Russia wasn't even mentioned once. Another important point for Brazil, especially for the finance ministry, is the taxation of the ultra-rich around the world. And this not only appeared in the text, but countries also said they were anxious to continue addressing the issue, including within the scope of other institutions. Considering that there was the possibility of Argentina's president, Javier Milei, blocking a consensus, we can say that getting the declaration signed was a major win for Brazil. However, it's worth saying that the declaration provided no detail beyond what had already been approved in previous G20 negotiation rounds.
Interesting. And so, in addition to that final declaration, which, is a very important part of any G20 summit, what would you highlight, maybe single out as the main results of Brazil's G20 presidency this year?
The anti-poverty agenda was certainly the biggest result this year, with the launch of the Global Alliance Against Hunger and Poverty, in line with the United Nations Agenda for 2030. The alliance will not focus on creating new sources of financing, but on the best allocation of existing resources and on sharing expertise in public policies, which could range from income transfers to school meals, including support for small farmers and access to drinking water. The initiative was pre-launched in July and already has the support of more than 80 countries. in addition to dozens of government and civil society organizations and different development banks. Furthermore, I would say that institutionalizing the G20 is social and creating a climate task force uniting environment and financial officials were also key achievements of Brazil's G20 presidency.
And yes, so just picking up on that, I mean, you mentioned climate change. That was also a central pillar of the G20 agenda this year. What kind of results can we single out on that front?
Well, climate experts weren't exactly happy with the declaration, which reiterated targets that have already been set but didn't make any progress. The final declaration did not mention the need to transition away from fossil fuels, as achieved at last year's UN climate conference. And regarding climate finance, the text transferred the responsibility for redefining the amounts due and who should pay them to the United Nations, saying it expects a positive result from COP29, which is currently taking place in Azerbaijan. In a speech on Tuesday, Lula proposed that developed countries should bring forward their climate neutrality targets from 2050 to 2040 or 2045 and called for all to have climate targets that encompass all sectors of the economy.
And I mean, you mentioned Argentina's Javier Milei earlier and his behavior. Now, that was it was the source of a lot of apprehension during these negotiations and the G20 summit. There was a big concern that he might end up trying to block the declaration consensus. But how did all that turn out in the end?
Despite the tension, Javier Milei avoided completely isolating himself within the G20 and signed the final declaration, even though he made verbal reservations about the text. It is true that the handshake between him and Lula was completely cold, and that the Brazilian president did not accept a bilateral meeting after being insulted several times by the Argentine president in recent months. But in the end, Argentina joined the global alliance that Brazil created to combat hunger and poverty, and the country also signed a bilateral deal to sell shale gas from its giant Vaca Muerta basin to Brazil, which is part of Argentina's efforts to escape its economic crisis through increased energy and mining exports.
And yeah, I mean, we said we'd talk about Lula's meeting with Xi Jinping in Brasília, right? I mean, we're recording this on Tuesday evening and they're set to meet on Wednesday. I mean, how important is this meeting? What are the expectations?
So, this is a state visit from Xi, which is a big deal, just like the one Lula made to China in 2023. The Chinese delegation that came to Brazil has about 1,000 people. The only catch is that Xi Jinping will be welcomed at the president's residence and not at the government palace as the request of the Chinese for security reasons. Well, China has been Brazil's largest trading partner for the last 15 years, with rising growth during that period. And it has increasingly invested in the country, especially in sectors such as oil, agriculture, mining, energy, transportation, and ports. Now we know China is trying to persuade Brazil to finally join the Belt and Road Initiative, its main infrastructure investment program abroad. Lula's statements in recent months have fueled speculation that this may indeed happen, but Brazilian diplomacy has avoided the subject, at least publicly. What diplomats have announced is that the agreements will focus on finance, infrastructure, um, development of production chains, ecological transformation, and technology, and that Brazil is seeking investments to benefit its growth and industrial policies and ecological transition as well.
Okay, Isabela Cruz, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Ewan. It's been great speaking with you. Until next time.
And Isabela is the Brazilian Report's reporter at the G20 Summit this week. If you like the Explaining Brazil podcast, give us a 5-star rating wherever you get your episodes. Or better yet, subscribe to The Brazilian Report, the journalistic engine behind this podcast. We run exclusively on subscriptions, so it's your support that keeps us going and growing. You can also sign up to become a member of our Buy Me a Coffee community by going to buymeacoffee.com/Brazilian Report. By joining, you'll get access to exclusive content and a shout out on this podcast. We at The Brazilian Report have been recognised for our quality, winning several international awards. In April 2024, we were named the best news website in the Americas for a small or local newsroom by the World Association of News Publishers, and we won Best Story at the 2024 Digiday Media Awards for our expose on an attempt to hack one of Brazil's Supreme Court justices. And to continue doing this work, we need your support, so go to Brazilian.report. Thanks for listening. Explaining Brazil will be back next week.